if the rate gets any higher, and it seems like they want it to be higher based on their history of raising the rate, I see this going in an unsustainable direction.
What's up, everybody? Today we've got an important topic, and that topic is: are games too tough so that very few people can win? Is poker becoming too top-heavy? What does it even mean? I think these are really important questions. I think that it's very important that there is a lot of mobility in poker in order to reach the highest stakes so that the dream is alive. And today I've got someone who has looked at a lot of data from this site that shows whether these stakes are truly beatable or not. He's also coached a number of people to beat the stakes. Did you say that's accurate, Patrick, or am I misquoting you?
Yeah, I've coached a lot of low stakes players and currently coach exclusively high stakes and nosebleeds players.
Right. So I feel like you have a very good opinion on what's really going on in the poker landscape, whereas I'm stuck in almost utopia, not exactly utopia. Like, I've got problems too as a nosebleed player and someone who's had a high win rate for a long time or whatever it is. And, I get perks and stuff. So it's important, I think, for, if I especially have influence, to watch out for the lower stakes players, because if the pathway for which it takes to get to the highest stakes is broken or very, very hard to navigate, this becomes an issue on the entire ecosystem, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. So for people who don't know me, I'm a high stakes, no limit hold'em coach. Right now, I just focus on high stakes nosebleeds online cash games, and a little bit of MTT as well on the side. And like you, I agree. I'm a little bit more concerned about low and mid stakes players. Like, the people in my network are not having a lot of difficulties right now. I know a lot of people who had their best year last year, but I am a little bit concerned about the pathway for new players. The direction that is going increasingly, to me, looks a bit broken, whether it's due to rake being too high or the security of the sites being compromised, and we can go into all of that.
Yeah, let's definitely go into all of that. I have a couple questions. Firstly, you also, I understand the data looks like a bit of a fragile system, which also isn't good. Like, for one thing, maybe it's traversable, but if it's also fragile on top of that, it's like a shaky bridge, in which case it's like, well, let's fix it before people fall off or too many people fall off. And it's like, oh, we need to build a new bridge or whatever.
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of people don't realize how low the average win rate is for the average regular in online poker. In live, of course, it's much higher, but in online, you can get a lot of volume in. And the average win rate on most sites these days is usually around one big blind per 100. And on
What?
the best sites, it's usually closer to three big blinds per 100. If the
What?
average, we're talking about the average regular in the pool. So
That's pretty. Define regular. Is this like someone who makes their living from poker? Is this like pro? Or is this like someone who's just, includes people that are trying to be pros?
yeah, they might not necessarily be making their living yet. I think a lot of them are playing a full-time schedule, but I define regular based on stats. So when I look at databases, I'm looking at their VPIP, PFR, and making sure that they're playing solid stats like a professional player would, as opposed to a recreational player who plays too many hands, usually plays too passively and things like that. So the average regular, yeah, for most online sites, pre-Rake-Back will win at around one big blind per 100. So you can see how it doesn't really take too much for the scales to tip. Like, the ecosystem is pretty fragile, and if you are charging too much rake or you have a lot of cheaters on your site, that plus one big blind per 100 can tip over to negative one big blind per 100, and then a lot of things change after that. It becomes a lot worse, and I think in most cases the balance will start to fall apart.
So wait, you said it was one big bet pre rake back. Are we talking? I'm a little confused because now you're mentioning rake as well. So how does this work? Because it seems like this is after the rake is taken and they just get more money from the rake back, which will add a lot to their win rate. Or am I mistaken?
It depends on the site that you're talking about. I'm talking about sites. Basically, when I say one big blind per 100, I'm talking about not GG poker. So, and not sites where, the game is to make rake back, and that's where most of your money comes from. So, on a site like PokerStars, for example, I was just actually looking at this week because I was doing some threads on Twitter about this, and the average regular at PokerStars 200, 500, and 1K was all the same. It was between one and two big blinds per 100. Then on top of that, they will get a little bit of rake back, but it's not a lot. It's probably another big blind. So when you're talking about the average regular, I think the win rate is a lot lower than most people expect because, people who are in the spotlight and who show their results tend to have higher win rates. Like we see the
Of
best players.
course.
We don't really see the average.
There's a lot of survivorship bias type sorts of things, or just
Yeah.
bias from. It's the same thing with Instagram. Obviously, you see the nicest stuff.
And sometimes people don't even share all their results. They just share when they're on a big upswing.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And then for GG poker, where the rake is a lot higher than other sites, that's when you actually see average reg win rates go deeply negative. So on GG poker at mid stakes right now, the average regular is losing before rake back at about negative 3.5 big blinds per 100.
Really? I mean, that's kind of
Then
crazy,
they,
especially in comparison to other sites.
yes, but
Hmm.
they do get more rake back. So it ends up being about the same, but from everything that I can tell, it seems like it is worse on GG. Like all things considered, rake back and just the baseline win rate, the average reg on GG is doing worse than on other sites right now, despite the fact that there are more fish recreational players on GG than most other sites.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I kind of knew there was high rake, and I heard something like there are not that many people, playing GG full time to win. I personally thought the tournaments were quite good on GG, but even like playing the cash games, I was kind of like thinking, man, I don't know. It just never seemed that appealing to me, and I wasn't using many like seating scripts, which they should, in my opinion, get rid of if they're going to get rid of some other things like HUDs. Like, why would seating scripts be any less toxic or to the community than HUDs? But what are your thoughts?
So one thing you mentioned about MTTs, and I don't really understand this at all. GG's rake for MTTs is actually standard.
Oh,
So if you
really?
play a $100
Huh.
tournament, you're paying like $9 in rake, and I think their 10Ks are usually 300 in rake, which is standard. And then if it's like a series or something, they might add an extra 100 in rake
Oh,
onto a
really?
10K. Yeah, so I don't really understand what went into that decision to make the rake and cash games so much higher. There
Yeah,
are
that's
a
so
lot of people
strange.
who are grinding GG cash games full time right now, but like I said in the beginning, almost like the majority of the average regulars win rate comes from rake back on GG. It doesn't come from just winning in the games.
It's just strange that they wouldn't like, charge so much for the other games. I want to know personally if it's really important for their profitability to charge so much rake, or is it just like out of greed? Because I mean, GG has a mix of well, other than charging rake, GG actually does a lot of positive things in my opinion for poker, and even like they even like the owners even outwardly say it. They want to promote poker, and whatever's good for poker is good for them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think GG does a lot of great things for poker, and I have written some threads about them recently, but I do want to be clear that I don't mean to attack GG Poker or any of its ambassadors. My threads recently about the rake being so high in GG cash games have just been to raise the alarm that, like, if the rate gets any higher, and it seems like they want it to be higher based on, you know, their history of raising the rate, I see this going in an unsustainable direction. And I also don't really love the way it is already, because the GGs, they have complete market dominance at this point, and it's sort of like they're forcing you into becoming a Rake-Back pro and grinding their leaderboards to make any significant amount of money on the site, whereas you can't really reg battle anymore. So although I think that GG is doing a lot of great things for poker, I don't really agree with their rake system in cash games as it is right now.
I definitely don't think killing reg battles is really a good idea. This also makes poker more of like a predatory thing if there's no reg
Yeah.
battles, because the you know the underlying principle of reg battles is like you saying to someone, "Hey, I think I'm better than you," blah blah blah, and you think you're better than me, and more it embodies more of a competitive spirit, whereas you just kill that uh, when you make it impossible. Not to mention, there's lots of rake from that, and it's not that hard to just like. I mean, it's very easy actually to just go somewhere else and play for like no rake, or like little rake, or you want to make it convenient. I just don't understand this decision much at all. Certainly, I would hope that they change this if they're really looking out for the players' interests and like keeping things in mind. And if we're talking about protecting the VIPs, it's better. Like that also goes for what the rake looks like, because if you're raking everybody, I mean the VIPs would actually get rake back. In my opinion, one model that I really liked that a lot of these secretive clubs, which we'll talk about a little bit as alternatives to high rake situations. They had like they were often run by VIPs, and there was a model that really worked. Where the VIPs would collect a ton of rake, but the game would also run around them. So yeah, they're losing kind of a lot of money, but they're still like not losing that much because they're getting rake back, which I think that makes sense to me. But maybe there's some kind of way of making that work on GG, or maybe they're doing something like that. I don't know.
I think they do that to some extent with their PVI system. Like, if you're a losing player, you get more rake back than if you're a winning player. But even
Right.
that is not really transparent. So it's kind of difficult to figure out what percentage of rake back you're even going to get as a professional. That's another issue. And then there are other rewards too that are kind of harder to quantify. Like, they have the jackpots. So if you're getting 4 big blinds per 100 rake back total, maybe a big blind or a big blind and a half of that is just going to come from jackpots. And then there's a lot of variance in those. Like, you could just not hit a jackpot for extremely long periods of time. You could run bad in that way, and there goes a lot of your rake back.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, I think they are doing that to some extent, but it's not really transparent how they calculate the rake back.
Well, that's too bad. Um, yeah, I mean, I also found out that I was in the highest rake back bracket immediately, and just like went online and lost, and then learned, oh, people are getting more rake back than me that are, maybe like top pros even. I was like, what is this? So, yeah, I have a bit of a negative experience with the rake back situation. I'm not a big fan of that system. It's too bad because it really, just have to see if they, um, really have the player's interest at heart. But I don't know if you answered the question if like it's really important for the profitability to charge this much rake, or is it just like they want to make more money?
Well, if I could steel man their argument, I would say what they would say is that they put a lot of money into advertising and getting a lot of recreationals to come play on their site, and so they have to charge a higher rake in order to make a profit if they're doing that. And they do
Right.
have really good games. They have, at this point, they have, like, it's almost like there's not anywhere else to go for a lot of players, especially outside of the United States because they have like all of the traffic, pretty much, vast majority of the traffic, and they have tons of recreational players on their site. And yeah, I think what you just said is what it really comes down to is like how much money are they actually profiting from the players? Because they could be, you know, spending a ton in advertising and in these things, and they have to charge this rake. Or they could just be making a killing on the regulars. Like they could just be making double or triple what other sites do on, you know, the average regular's hands.
Well, let me
And we
ask you
don't really
this:
know what that is.
do you have any opinion on what's like a reasonable amount to make from the game, overall net profit, uh, from regulars or whatever, however you even quantify, like what's a reasonable amount? Because it looks like it's still possible to win. It's just I don't know how hard it is. Maybe very very hard. I think very very hard is not good. Um, but like how realistic is it for someone coming along? I heard relatively recently, in fact, that someone said, "Oh, it's like not really possible to like come along and you're 23 and say I want to become a poker pro for like $2,000 to your name." And I thought to myself, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like it should be that hard for someone with $2,000. You know what I mean? Sounds like that should be something that's a realistic thing if they had like a math degree or whatever and they're quite smart. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to your first question about how much a site should make on a player, I
Mm-hmm.
don't really know. I'm not an operator. If you look at like a really good player's win rates on and their profit on like a site like PokerStars that has more standard rake, a player like that will be only giving a fraction of his earnings back to the site, right? I mean, maybe he's winning at 8 big blinds per 100 and he's getting raked 3
I
at
thought
higher
Poker
stakes,
Stars
something like
was
that.
I thought Poker Stars was like, did they changed things recently, right? Now they gave brought back the rewards and they're charging less rake, or I don't know what the situation is.
They have brought back something that they say looks similar to their old Supernova Elite Rake-Back program, but I haven't looked too deeply into that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so like the really winning players, they're giving back a fraction of their earnings to the site, and
Right.
then if you look at the average regulars, they might be giving back a lot more in terms of their win rate is lower, so their winnings are less, but they're paying the same rake as the better pros. Maybe they're getting raked equal amount to how much they're making, or you know maybe double what they're making if they're barely winning players. But it's sort of like taxes, like if a government takes 40 or 50% from their citizens in taxes, people don't complain too much. But if the government takes 90% of the winnings, or of their citizens' incomes and taxes, then people will start to revolt, right? So there's not like an exact number, but it's fairly clear to see when things are really bad and people are just getting taken.
Okay, so we're saying that there is a problem right now. We don't know how to quantify it perfectly, but there's a problem. Is that what
Yes,
is
and
that
I
my
think it
consensus?
is on a site like GG. I do think, yeah, it is really difficult for someone to just start out and build a role, because it's sort of a rake trap. And then other sites do have problems as well. So I have not coached low stakes players in a few years, so I can't speak, with a ton of confidence on this. But I do think just in the last 5 years, it has gotten a lot harder to get started in poker. And then if you go back like 10 to 15 years, it's astronomically harder now than it used to be in like the times of the poker boom.
Well, if that is the case, then I'd find it very difficult for there to be a poker boom unless there's just like a sea of, VIPs that join, which requires quite a big change in my opinion. I would think that if it's astronomically harder, that's just not good. I have the question: are the stakes like 25, 50 cent, 50 cent a dollar really beatable on GG and other sites for more than like three big blinds per hundred? And um, what about other sites?
It depends on the rake and how many recreationals there are. So typically, if you're playing low stakes, you want to be seeing at least one recreational per table in your games
Hmm.
because the rake is very high. So if you're paying 8 or 10 big blinds per hundred in rake, you need somebody at that table to be losing at a pretty significant rate. If you're just reg battling at that rake structure, it's not going to work out very well for you.
So rig battles are 100% dead.
On GG poker, I don't think anybody should really be reg battling. It just doesn't really make any sense.
Okay.
And the thing about reg battling is somebody has to lose, right?
Yeah.
Because you're all paying rake, and unless the rake is really really low, somebody's going to be losing at a fairly significant margin. So I do love reg battles as well, but it's like somebody has to basically think that they're winning and be wrong about it pretty significantly for a reg
Right.
battle to even happen in the first place, right?
I'm gonna
But
go
yeah,
with Ed.
if you're coming up in the stakes, you need to make sure that you're not paying astronomical rake and that you have a lot of recreational players in your games. And I do
So what
think that
about
that's possible, but it's harder these days.
so what about other sites? How viable is it on other sites?
Okay, so GG again, rake is very high. They have a lot of fish, but you have to basically grind the Rake-Back system to make money there. Then you have stars. Stars is actually quite good. They have lower rake and they have plenty of recreational players. The main problem with stars right now is they just have less traffic overall, but that shouldn't really be a a big issue at low stakes because if you're playing low stakes, you should be able to find games. Then you have other like ring fence sites. So you have like the U.S. sites like Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey sites in the
Hmm.
U.S. And then there are other smaller sites like Italy has their own ring fenced pools. Those sites tend to be better as well. You're going to be paying approximately standard rake. The regs tend to be worse on those because it's a smaller pool and you can't just play against anyone from anywhere in the world. And they tend to have a lot of recreationals as well. So those are probably the best bet. Let's see, what else did I leave out? There's ACR. I think the great thing about ACR is their rake is really, really low. And if you go up to high stakes, the rake is almost non-existent. So that's my favorite thing about ACR. It is really like the place to reg battle.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, their lobbies are like anonymized, and you can only view 3 tables every 24 hours because they've done that to prevent data mining and also make it more difficult to bum hunt and seed script. I don't really think that's worked out that well at the higher stakes. I think it does make some sense at lower stakes. But so like what I'm trying to say is that there are actually a lot of pretty epic reg battles, even at like nosebleeds going on ACR right now, like 100, 200.
Oh, really?
But nobody sees them because because their lobby is anonymous.
Oh, what a
So
weird
that's a bit of a
problem.
bummer. Yeah. But I think ACR is good. They also had the recent issue with all of the bots, but the poker community was able to identify a ton of those bots, and they are actually banning them from the site right now. And they say that they're gonna
Oh, they are.
issue some refunds pretty soon. So
Oh,
it's mid-February time of this recording. So hopefully those will, we'll get some good news about that soon.
okay, that's some good news.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That I thought that they weren't doing anything actually, but that's
No, they
sounds quite
definitely
promising.
are. Yeah, it took them a while to like realize that they had such a big problem on their hands, and they had several like pretty big PR missteps where they basically denied that this was an issue for a long time publicly, and then the community used a bunch of data mine hand histories to sort of create a statistical case to prove to them that a lot of these players are bots, and that
That's smart.
combined, I think,
Hmm.
with some bad press, they eventually came around, and they do realize now, and they're banning a lot of these accounts now. So yeah, that's been great news. And then one other site I will mention is Ignition, which is not looking as good right now. Ignition seems to be flooded with like the same kind of type of bots as ACR, and we can tell this because they play in a similar way as the ACR bots do,
Hmm.
but they're even more aggressively uh, like cheating on Ignition, because Ignition is, for people who don't know, it's also Bovada and Bodog. It's the same network. And this was a great site to play on from the US for a very long time. You can also access it from Australia. And the rake was relatively low. The games were really good. But now it seems to be flooded with these bots that use a mix of RTA and exploits, but on Ignition they also collude with each other. So they're getting you into a multi-way pod and raising you out of it. I posted a thread on this on my Twitter at Mobius Poker, with a bunch of examples of just blatant collusion. And I can say that Ignition is trying to do something about this also. I've been working with them personally, trying to help them with this, but they are being pretty slow. Again, it's unfortunate that a lot of these sites, like their security teams, don't seem to be very well equipped to handle these things.
Oh, that's
So
too
that's
bad.
the sort of the state of the union. And then there's the app games, which I don't really generally recommend people play on apps because the security is even worse there, although there can be some good situations with the app games.
I understand you did try to assist Ignition with its issue. Is that right?
Yeah, they called me, and I
Oh,
spoke to them for over an hour, but that was over a month ago, and I haven't heard much since. So, and as of right now, it seems like these bots are still on the site. So if they are banning them, I don't think they've banned all of them. And another issue is that I think we're seeing this a little bit on ACR, is that you can ban these bots, but you have to do multiple waves of banning, because there's no problem for them to just make more accounts after they get an account banned. So it's like you have to ban them multiple times, otherwise they just keep coming back. But you can get rid of them.
hmm. Oh, that's good news. I was just talking actually with Berkey, and he was saying like, oh, there's not really a solution, but it sounds like you're saying there is a solution, but you just need to be a bit more persistent, like swatting some flies or like putting up
Yeah, I
some
mean,
tests.
in terms of these specific bot rings that I'm talking about, there is a solution. Like they've been banned on other sites. I know that for sure, and they haven't come back on those sites. So, in terms of like, if you're talking about years down the road, that I mean, look, I don't think that it's actually anywhere close to an impossible task to police poker properly, because poker, there will always be like some rate of cheating, but it's a
Right.
hard game to cheat at. It's not like chess where you can just cheat and you can win every time. There's a ton of variance in poker. So even if you're cheating, like with RTA, you can still lose for a while. And then the other thing is that if you do get caught, your funds get confiscated. So there is like a downside. There's a risk to cheating, and there are a lot of creative ways to catch cheaters, which I think we'll hopefully see poker sites, continue to improve their security, at least the ones that are taking security seriously. So overall, like I'm actually pretty optimistic about at least, the sites that really want to catch cheaters that they would be able to.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if you should mention the ways to catch cheaters on the podcast or not, or rather just share them privately. Maybe more prudent than than sharing like this. But
Yeah, I mean,
that's huh?
essentially you're just looking for like non-human behavior, and there's a lot of ways with data analytics that you can prove that someone is not a human. But yes, like most poker site security teams they obviously don't give away their detection methods because it just makes it easier for people to avoid them.
Right, right. Well, then let's not talk about that. Okay, so that's interesting. Obviously, cheating is a major barrier to the entire economy, and once like people, once there's too much cheating, especially like the economy is poisoned, especially, and there's also the possibility of, and there has been some instances of this in varying levels of something called the tragedy of the commons, which is for the audience. It's basically when, some people cheating is one variation of this, but actually all variations of this are cheating, but in different forms. An example would be to pollute the economy and all of a sudden, makes a profit out of it. And all of a sudden it seems to make sense to pollute the economy. And so like everyone starts polluting the economy and it up the economy for everyone. But on the individual level, it makes sense from the narrow point of view to do that. You have to sacrifice money otherwise for the sake of virtue in order to not do that. And so an example in poker actually is multi-accounting in some instances, as I've been aware of in Asia, and I just realized at some point like, oh, actually it's wrong, and I had an issue with that, and then it was like, oh, it's just there's something called the what is it called? There's this line of just what's considered normal. I forgot what it's called. Damn it! But normal in ethics and like based on like behavior of everyone else, the line moves, etc. But the line, it seems like poker's a bit self-policing in that people seem to logically understand. People are a bit more attuned to logic at poker, where something's not right, like RTA is no good, or any kind of like thing that's against the spirit of the game is not good. But it'd be really ideal to keep this situation good for everyone, so that there's more potential winners out there in the fair kind of way. I do want to ask. I mean, I know. Well, I kind of know your thoughts on mass data analysis as a method to detect cheating. It seems like it's required from my point of view. What are your thoughts on it versus a tool to exploit? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so mass data analysis, if anybody doesn't know what that means who's listening, it basically means that there are people who are observing the games. There are third party, companies that have servers that just watch online poker games, and they record the hand histories, and then they sell those hand histories to make a profit, and poker players can buy them. And similar things happen in other industries too, like financial markets. You can buy market data, just to make an analogy. So mass database analysis is when you buy lots of these hand histories and then you run statistical analysis on them to basically find where people reliably make mistakes relative to the game theory optimal poker strategy.
Mm-hmm.
My view on this is I think it is an inevitable outcome in online poker. it's sort of like HUDs, but even harder to stop than HUDs, because with mass data analysis, you're doing this work away from the tables. So you're not doing anything actively while you're playing. Whereas, a HUD, you could at least catch somebody because they have some sort of software running while they're playing. But mass data analysis is completely off the table, away from the games, and just done in study time. So the only way to stop people from doing mass data analysis is to make the games completely unobservable. And that has a lot of other issues, because if you can't see what's going on in the games, you can't tell if the games are fair or beatable. It also kills the spectator aspect of poker. So I don't think it's really enforceable to stop it. I personally view it as another, like aspect of skill in poker, is to be able to do this and to gain an edge from it. And a lot of sites have this against their terms of service now, that you can't do this type of work. But I just think it's a counterproductive rule, because it's just not enforceable. So putting that rule in place is really it's just kind of hurting people who follow the terms of service strictly, if you know what I mean.
I do. I think it's sort of similar to the HUD thing, except more acceptable, actually. Because as you said, it's just another tool to get an edge, and there's nothing like in a vacuum that makes it bad until a site says, okay, we don't want it. But even in that case, like, it doesn't have to be used in a predatory way against a particular player. You could still get the data in some other kind of way without breaking that site's terms of service. In poker, you're supposed to use creative means to get an edge without, like, outright knowing the person's cards, and that's kind of the idea of the game. So I view mass data analysis to be not bad in a vacuum, especially when it has the capacity to detect much of these cheating instances or abnormalities. I think it's something that should be used in some kind of way.
You can use mass database analysis to study the population as a whole, and then you can also use it to target specific players. And I don't really know how I feel about the second one. I think my feeling is that if it's not enforceable, it should be allowed. And I personally would rather just have full transparency and just have all of the data out there, at least for professional players, and maybe it could be anonymized for recreational players. But the distinction is that if you are doing population level analysis, you're just studying how the pools play as a whole. Usually you divide between regs and recreational players, and you're studying how all regulars play on average. Whereas if you're doing it to target specific players, that's when you're just looking at one screen name and all of the hands for that person and their stats, and trying to create a strategy against one specific player, which of course is going to be more powerful than trying to exploit the average behavior of the population. And I thought that most people were against using mass data to gain an edge against an individual opponent. But I feel like I've been proven wrong recently, because there are sites now like Smart Hand and StatName, which are sites that aggregate a lot of cash game data. And you don't have to purchase the hand histories. You just purchase a subscription and you can look up any player you want. And a ton of players use this now. So like you have a lot of regulars who have a subscription to this site where they can just type in anyone's screen name. And it's not just giving you like their earnings, it's giving you a lot of stats as well, and like their red line. So like you were saying before, there is sort of like this idea that what is okay is at least to some extent determined by how many people are doing something. And I think we are moving towards more and more regulars using mass database analysis because of these hands like SmartHand and StatName becoming so popular. And that's what they are.
I think the term is called the Overton window. I believe that's what it's called.
Yeah, I think so.
So here's the thing. I think that things can be bad, period, according to logic and like what's right, etc. If the Overton window is quite far, that makes them like a little bit, that negates it a little bit, but it still makes them like not good if like the Overton window is just like totally messed up, to be honest. Um,
Sure.
in this case, I don't think really that it's unless it's against the terms of service. I like have trouble seeing that buying someone's hand histories and playing against them is really like a bad thing. Because like why is it like why can't someone just like do a bunch of research on a player and like play them? That happens all the time. Like is it bad now to get reads on a player from someone else? I mean, at some point it's like, well, how do you even protect against these kinds of things? And they're all kind of like similar, and like where's the line?
Yeah, well, if you look at like any other sport or industry, this is a major strategy in like every sport, like the NFL,
Really?
the NBA, they're all using tons of data. Um, yeah, of course, they're probably way more sophisticated than poker players at this point, if we're talking about major league sports. Another thing to point out is like it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to give you an enormous edge usually, unless a player has massive leaks that are visible when you have a larger sample on them. And it doesn't. One argument people might make is that poker is a game of incomplete information, and people who don't really understand database analysis will say this is giving you complete information in an incomplete information game. But it's not giving you complete information. It's just giving you more incomplete information, because even if you're looking at data mined hand histories, you're not seeing hands that got folded or that didn't get shown down. So if you can't see the showdowns, you can't see the player's range composition that they're folding, or like really anything before the river. So it's the information that you're getting is not like a silver bullet type of edge.
Sure.
It's a relatively small edge,
Um,
unless you do a ton of work, you can make that edge bigger.
yeah, that's another thing is as someone who's done my research before on opponents way back in the day, it took a bit of an effort, even in like the hands that even just going over a lot of hands that you play with someone. It's just it takes a minute of effort, and someone could just change how they play it. In fact, against one high stakes
Right. Yeah.
player, he actually figured out that I had done the research on him, which I was really impressed by. I had no idea. He changed how he played, and I still beat him, but I didn't realize that he changed how he played.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, so that's another really good point. Is it's not even if you do gain a big edge from it, it's not an unexploitable edge. Because
right.
let's say I do a bunch of research on you and I find out that you are overfolding the river or something, and then I start bluffing the river a lot. Well, if you recognize that I'm over bluffing the river to exploit you, you can counter exploit me by calling more. And that's actually a kind of a hard situation to navigate, because I might think that you've adjusted, but it's going to take me some time to actually prove that you've adjusted, especially if you're adjusting and you're countering me in a smart way. You might call me down with fifth pair in a huge pot, and I'll think, oh, maybe he's changed his strategy. But if you're smarter about it, it can take a while for you, for me to realize that you've changed your strategy. So it can gain you a good edge, but it's never an unexploitable edge. You are, by definition, you're making yourself exploitable by using these types of strategies. Another thing that I'll just say is I think there's a kind of a problem, even if you were to ban mass database analysis, if you were to ban data mining, one issue is that there are already hundreds of millions of hands that have been data mined over the last 5 to 10 years. So especially for player types that don't really change their strategy over time, like recreationals, there's already more than enough information out there. So stopping it now is not going to really have a dramatic impact. Another thing is that even if you were to be able to stop these third-party data mining sites, which GG recently announced they're going to try to do that, stopping them, there's no real way to completely stop it, because then you have stables, you've got groups of poker players, and they can gain a major advantage by sharing their hand histories. And I don't think there's any way that a site can prove that a group of players is doing that. And even on an individual level, like, you sort of get this incumbent advantage. If you've been playing on a site for 2 years, you are collecting a lot of data, and if you have 500,000 or 1 million hands that you've personally played in your database, there's a lot of population analysis that you can do with that. So that's actually a pretty big advantage over a newcomer if you have that data and someone who's brand new to the pool doesn't, which could make it a higher barrier to entry for new people to get started
I
in the
I
games.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always should be some kind of advantage for being in something long enough, right? The major issue is just protecting the VIPs, which I understand. I don't think it's really so bad that some things are general patterns of VIPs that you could recall, especially if you've been playing for a while, or that you can assume are roughly true, such as weakest strong, strongest weak. Like, a lot of people know that. It's very, very consistent over. It's the same thing. It'd be interesting to have someone on here that defends this MDA stuff. And we'd like to get the other side of it, but I'm just struggling to see why it's bad in a vacuum. It just seems rooted in protecting the VIPs. I get that. I definitely think players should at least allow the VIPs to have some breath, not just get slaughtered all the time. Again, banning seeding scripts I think is good. But that's the biggest thing. My particular concern also is with, I think the VIPs actually are kind of catered to, which is nice, to a fair degree anyway. My biggest concern is with the struggling class of poker players. Like, do you have like a good insight on what the players starting out at like 50 cent, dollar, 25, 50 cent, like these kinds of stakes should do?
I think if you're starting out in cash games, some sort of ring-fenced site is probably the safest option if you have that option. A lot of people don't have that option. A lot of people don't live in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. I coached a large stable. I coached for Poker Detox from late 2019 to around 2022. And we had a lot of success bringing people up from 50 NL to, in some cases, like 2K NL in the period of a year or so. But like I've said earlier, there are problems with some of these sites, like Ignition, having bots on them now. And I'm not really sure. I've not, as far as like GG, I've not coached very many, really any players at low stakes on GG. So I'm not sure how difficult that is.
I will say that there's these private clubs coming up. The irony was I looked for the spots for a lot of the lower stakes players, and what happened was I found plenty of spots for me and the high stakes players. So, well, I figure that there must be potential for lower stakes players with that, but I did quickly run into the problem of, okay, I did win a large amount from a whale at 1020. I won like $70,000. They're like a legit whale,
Wow.
basically. And then they just like didn't pay. And then I went on like a wild goose chase, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So that's like clearly a major risk. But it just seems like these, there's a million little games, little private games and things like that. And it seems like if someone could navigate these things well, that there might be like an asset there for a lot of these struggling players. Like, and occasionally players just come and just dust out of their mind, and like 50 cent a dollar or whatever it is. Like you can get like some super whales if you're patient enough or you find the right game. Like, just get some guy who like thinks it's funny to go all in and is rich
Yeah.
with nothing.
I guess what I would say to somebody who's like just starting out now is like probably it's best to be on as many sites as possible because then you can focus on game selection. So you might have 3 or 4 sites where you get a little bit of volume on each. Maybe one is your primary site, but you're always looking for the best games possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to be sort of plugged into the community, I think, because right now, like specifically at this moment in time, and I do want to say, I think it could get a lot better from here on out.
Hmm.
But like at this moment, I feel like there are a lot of traps that you could fall into. Like you could be playing on Ignition and not realize that you're getting colluded against, or that there are all these bots on there. The same thing we could have said for ACR up until a month ago. GG, if you don't actually do your research or at least talk to some people about how high the rake is, you might think that you're playing a beatable game when you're really not. I think that, so yeah, like at minimum, getting on as many sites as you can and trying to find the best games possible, communicating with a lot of other people to make sure that you don't make any big mistakes with your game selection is probably the best way to go. And then you could also go further and get coaching, like join a stable or something, which has proven results to help your odds a little bit more.
Well, I myself am making a community as well. One of the big goals being to provide more visibility of the landscape of the games because that's very, very important and kind of underappreciated in terms of actually trying to win. Whereas I feel like the strategy aspect is harder. It's kind of beat to death. There's tons of strategy content out there. Was there a particular reason why your higher stakes players happen to have you at their best year as of last year? And I mean, is it because they've been around? I mean, have they been around since like 2012? Or is it, yeah, what's up with this?
Well, some of them have been around longer than others, but in a lot of ways, I feel like high stakes is safer right now. Like the bots, for example, are not an issue at high stakes because the bots are flooding mid stakes and like usually 5-10 tops.
Hmm.
ACR is good right now, and even GG at nosebleeds can be good if you game select well. So like, and I just want to clarify, my program is just for high stakes players. So if you're a lower stakes player, like below 500 NL online, I can't coach you there. But I think the biggest thing it comes down to is just that my students are not average players. Like we work incredibly hard. We're trying to be the best stable in the world at Mobius Cash, my high stakes stable. And we've got some extremely good players, and we do have access to nosebleed games on ACR and GG. So it's it's been a lot of work, and I don't think that we are like the average players by any means. But I am concerned, like I said, about the average players.
Why are you so optimistic about the future of poker?
Well, I think poker has been played for generations, and it's going to continue to be played for generations. And like, you could make the argument that poker is going to move more to the live scene because of risks of cheating. But I don't really see that as like how our society is going at all. I think people just want to do more and more things online, virtually. And uh, in the U.S., it's slow, but more and more sites, more and more states are opening up and legalizing poker. And, if something like California opened up, that would be massive, right? Like, that would completely change everything because California is like more than half of the U.S. poker market. So that would
Right.
be equivalent to basically the U.S. legalizing federally. So it's that, and also I don't personally think that cheating is like detecting cheating in poker is not by any means an impossible task. There's a lot of things that you can do to detect cheaters, and then we may also just need some sort of common sense rules in place. Like, I think that one thing that I would be in favor of is like just known screen names for if you're like any sort of significant winning player in online poker, you need to
Sure.
have like a known screen name. Maybe you will have to have a webcam in the future when you play online poker. But the point is, there are many solutions. And like, we are making progress even right now. Like I said, we just got hundreds of bots banned from ACR. So things are looking up as well. But I think that we need to just be really vigilant. And especially, the situation with GG is a good example of that, where they want to take away our ability to data mine and to have vision over the games. But I think we need that now more than ever to make sure that the games are safe. But overall, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, it sounds like there should be at least some kind of neutral party overlooking this with GG, or just some kind of rough accountability, just in case. Like some third party that's licensed at Min or whatever. Like that seems like a solution. By the way, with the webcam thing, I don't know if the same thing would happen in the U.S., but in Asia they did try to do this. By the way, but what happened was people started like pointing the camera a little up, and they, they're the people still multi-counted anyway. And then there's a point where like no one was even looking at the camera, way over in the corner or something.
Yeah, and I think like in the future that might not be the best strategy because like with AI now, like we're seeing like Sora just came out, the OpenAI video generator. Like artificial intelligence probably will have a pretty easy time of generating whatever video you want that you could
Oh
like put
yeah,
into
yeah.
that stream. So like maybe webcams are not the solution, but like you can certainly run checks to see if someone is playing in a non-human type of way. And I think there will always be some players who are like cheating in a smart way and getting away with it, but that won't like kill the bottom line for the average
Right.
poker player if a
Well,
few people get by.
it does need to be stopped, and I think one of the issues actually in today's world is that there's very little accountability. Like you can kind of like if you're a cheater, you can just like cheat one area, and then you can just oh you got caught. You can cheat somewhere else, and you can continue the cycle, and it poisons a lot of communities in general. I specifically think there needs to be names attached to these people, or at least some
Mm-hmm.
examples made.
Just listening to the players is such a no-brainer for the sites. And I know that it can be difficult to communicate with such a large group of people, and there are a lot of false positives, but at least like at the really high stakes, the players are very good at identifying who's a cheater. Like it's usually someone who's winning tons of money with a style that doesn't really make sense and nobody knows who they are. Like it's pretty rare to have that combination and for a person to not be cheating. Like for example, there's a player on ACR now, right now, who has won over 1 million on that site, and every time he sits down in the high stakes games now, he shuts down the entire lobby because if he is cheating, he's cheating in a pretty smart way, and like he's passed whatever security checks the site has put them through. But pretty much like it's a consensus among the top players that this guy is cheating. And so when he sits down, everybody just sits out. So I share that story because, like, you know, sometimes it really is just, it's obvious to the professional players who are playing with these accounts that they're cheating. And we could hopefully tap, like, in the future, sites will have a better way of just tapping into that wealth of knowledge that the players have.
Right.
Because they could just tell you, like, you know, this guy's cheating. It's it's unanimous among the players. There is a community of high stakes players in a Discord right now. It's like 100 strong, probably more than that at this point. And the people who've organized that have gotten site reps into that community. So it's like more of a direct line of communication between the players and the sites. And that is helping. And I hope that we see more of that in the future.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's cool. Well, yeah, it sounds pretty promising. I want to get some more information on this subject and see what sites are doing. But thank you for the breakdown. So, are there any last words before you gotta go? Do you want to talk about your coaching or anything?
Yeah, I have a high stakes stable called Mobius Cash. We only take half a dozen people per year, and you have to be a high stakes online player for that. But if you're a lower stakes player, I also have a program, my GTO Stat Checker course. So that is basically a hand to note pop up and a video course alongside that, and it's the only pop up of its kind, at least so far, where it just takes your hands and automatically checks your stats and tells you where you're deviating from GTO. So that's available for lower stakes players too. And if you want to just keep up with me and like, I will be posting about the situation on GG and Ignition and ACR as things unfold. You can follow me on Twitter at Mobius Poker.
All right. Thank you, Patrick, for your time. And I'd also like to say, well, I hope that if GG can find a way to support the lower stakes players into achieving the poker dream and not making it very difficult. I don't know what their situation looks like. I really hope that they step up. They've done a lot of positive things for poker, and I hope other sites step up as well. I guess we'll see in the future what happens. There's
I think
decent amount of potential.
I think that we can all agree that, like, poker is a skill game, and personally, I don't like to see it, and I think most people don't like to see it, that it is, at least on that site, the dominant site, becoming a leaderboards race. If you're a cash game player and you just have to lose to the house and then hope that they give you enough back through some obscure reward system that you turn a profit. And I don't think that's good for the future of poker, and I'm going to keep trying to educate people on stuff like that. I think that we can change course, and I think that they can do a lot of good for the future of online poker. They've already done a lot of good, and they can do a lot more. So I am optimistic.
All right. Well, me too. They seem to have had a lot of good faith, and the future waits. Hopefully, we'll make a new poker boom and get rid of all the cheaters.